I'm disappointed in the wheat today.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Comstock Channel. I'm Marlin Bohling with you. I hope you had a good Memorial Day weekend, a long weekend. So we had a 3-day break from the markets. Here with me, I have the president of Comstock Investments, Mr. Matthew Kruse. And it's going to be a short trading week this week, Matthew. So let's see what's going to be driving the markets. So far, everything seems to be kind of flat on the corn and soybeans, not doing much. They're trouncing the wheat. Livestock markets are really dragging their feet today. Let's start off with a look at the grain sector here. And I want to get your thoughts on what we're looking at when it comes to the weather scenario as it's impacting our current growing season here. Let's start by taking a look here at the outlooks. I guess this is going to be for maybe about within a week or so. And this would be starting off with the precipitation outlook by next Monday. What do you think here?
This chart here takes us through the first week of, this first week right now, last week of May, basically, until June 2nd. And, we've had, I think most everywhere had some decent rains for most of the growing region, probably left out parts of Nebraska. But so this week the rainfall is kind of pulling back a little bit, but I think they're gonna come out here the planting pace reports. You're probably gonna see at least 90% of the corn planted and 80% of the beans planted. They're coming out with the crop progress reports start here later this afternoon, and we'll see our first one where they're expecting to see a good start to the crop, probably over 70% rated good to excellent, maybe as much as 75%. They tend to start pretty high, and then, as you get through the challenges of Mother Nature through the growing season, and they start to drift lower a lot of times. But looking out into next week, we kind of see the rainfall coming back in a lot of areas, especially into Iowa and southern Minnesota there. You're finally seeing some good rain there in Nebraska. I think they've been hurting. We talked to we have a branch in western Nebraska where I'm actually going out to see him later this week. So I'll get to see a lot of what the fields look like on Interstate 80 anyway, through Nebraska. But he said that they hadn't had hardly anything, a rainfall in his region and kind of that central or west central Nebraska last weekend. But it looks like they're finally getting something. But I know there's still maybe parts in most Illinois is in well, but there's parts in northern Illinois that are leaning drier. But we're still in that time period where the moisture demands are quite low, and you really got to get to that July, August period where the rainfall becomes more critical. But I think our biggest missing ingredient is probably the heat. And, it's been pretty cool now for the last week or 10 days. But it looks like we're finally going to get back into the 80s here this weekend. And I think you'll really begin to see the crops take off after that.
Well, this is looking 2 weeks out, basically. And looking at the northern half of the Corn Belt, I mean, you go from Illinois east, I don't see a lot on there, Matthew. And we've been talking about that quite a bit here lately, where about the northern third of Illinois, they've missed out on almost all the moisture this spring.
There's always the have-nots or in the have someplace, and that's definitely one spot. They're a lot closer to Chicago, so the CBOT might take more notice. That seems to be the case a lot of times where they look in their own region and their backyard. But you look in the southeast part of the United States, even down into Texas, Oklahoma it just kind of seems like it's been ground zero for rainfall precipitation so far this year. They've been extremely wet, and they looks like they're going to have more on the way.
And we had a ton of moisture there last weekend. Let's take a look a little further out. Let's go out to, what is this, about a month now. So what are we looking at here? This is an anomaly map, right?
A lot of times we want to always know what's in the forecast, but the longer you go, the less accurate those forecasts are. And so I don't want to get too far out here, but looking at the month of June, we maybe lean a little bit drier in some areas here. You can see in those darker regions, but by no means does it mean there's a drought. Maybe you're an inch below the average in a lot of areas. So, instead of getting 4 inches, you get 3 inches. Instead of 3 inches, you get 2, or something like that. So it's no major alarms going off, but you can kind of see that there's a lot of tendency to lean drier through the month of June. But again, June isn't that critical weather month. It's really when we get into the July and August when we're tasseling and the evaporation rates are a lot higher because the heat picks up and so but it just gives you a rough idea. Now I know they're meteorologists, and even I was looking at the USDA forecasts where they're still clinging to that longer term forecast where they see the Western Corn Belt leaning much drier. And that seems like a trend that we've had the last 5 years, where the Eastern Corn Belt seems to get adequate rainfall for the most part, but that Western Corn Belt leans drier. And so, that's what the USDA and some of those forecast those 3-month outlook maps are calling for still. And so, we'll have to see when we get there. But that's why it's important to get the crop in early and get some rain now so we can keep it away and store it in our soil bank, and because we're probably going to need it later.
Looks like it might be hard to get in the field in the the mid-south region, down not quite to the Delta, but a little north of there. My goodness, that's a
You would
wet
think
episode
so.
all the way.
I would think a lot of those there would be planted already. But they get a lot earlier start than we do, obviously. But yeah, they're getting heavy rainfall in those regions, aren't they?
I was watching some of the storm coverage over the weekend of tornado coverage in the south. And I know there was some video from Mississippi, and the corn was all tasseled out already. I was amazed at that, how big it was. Just shocking, the maturity already in the corn that far. I do want to flip the script here, and let's go south of the equator. I know you have a lot of ties in Brazil, but if we look at the temperature anomaly here in Brazil, now this is for basically a little later this week, a couple days out. But what does this mean to you when you look at this map here?
Well, I've just followed some of the meteorologists in Brazil, and they've kind of pointed out that there's a major cold front coming through, and their winter season is starting now. Obviously, they're on the opposite side of the equator, and they've pointed out that there is some potential for frost, and that's the concern there. And that frost can have an impact on some of those later planted safrinha corn crops, principally in it looks like in the state of Paraná and Mato Grosso do Sul. Paraná is the second largest corn producing state. Mato Grosso do Sul is the third largest. And so you combine those together, I think I added up, it's like 27% of their overall safrinha corn production. So it's not insignificant. But yeah, so we'll have to see. They've had some frost damage in the past, so it wouldn't be the first time this had happened. But it seems like as you get into June, the temperatures in the evening temperatures, can fall below zero. And if they planted later, that crop hasn't had time to completely mature, and so it basically that frost comes, it'll just stop the plant growth in its tracks. And so if it has not reached black layer yet in the corn, it can be, you can lose tremendous yield to the crop, from that frost. And so that's something that we're looking for.
Can you give us an idea how far along they are in their growing season? Their soybeans, from what I understand, are pretty much done about everywhere, aren't they, for the harvest?
Yeah, soybeans are done. In the case of the second crop of corn, they really begin harvest for like the first week of June on average. Now there might even be some early go-getters that are already harvesting here in late May. But on the average, the country is starting kind of that first week of June. And it's really historically, they've, that July 8th, I think, is what I pegged as an average, where they're reached 50% done. Now, this year, the way everything has turned dry, they haven't hardly had any significant rainfall in May. And so I think there's going to be a rapid dry down effect. And so they could already reach, kind of have half of the crop harvested by the end of June. But it's all going to start here very shortly.
Now, do they normally start harvesting in the north and work their way south? I'm guessing it's about opposite of here.
It's usually Mato Grosso and Paraná, which kind of start simultaneously there in in January if they can with the safrinha corn planting, and then they'll start late May, early June with the harvest in those areas. There's some other areas in Goiás and Minas Gerais, São Paulo that are a little bit later, but ideally they want to get it all in by February 20th. I think that's kind of the drop off date, but there's still as much as 30% of that crop that goes in past that February 20th date, which is kind of my drop dead date. When you should, if you, not that you can't plant past February 20th, obviously you can, but you should expect a yield lag every day you're planting past that point.
Well, of course, it seems like Brazil has been increasing its corn and soybean production right along as we go. Let's take a look at some of these corn production estimates for this year. It seems like a wide variety of estimates here.
Oh yeah, they're all over the place, right? You from the lowest to highest was like 20 million metric tons. That's like 800 million bushel difference from the high end to the low end, and you can kind of see there the USDA was at 126 and they increased it up to 130. So we're not too far away from that ourselves. I got to get into the harvest yet to kind of see how yields perform at this point. I'm a little skeptical on some of those higher end estimates just because I think we needed to see more rainfall in the month of May to get some of those rosier estimates, which we didn't get. But I think they were possible had we had more rainfall in May. Yeah, then it was certainly possible. But I think the rainy season ended on time for the most part, kind of slowed down in April and was pretty much done by May 1st or early May. But yeah, you kind of see what the average there is pretty much right at what the USDA is at, 130 million metric tons. But, obviously people see the numbers differently. But I think the CONAB, I expect them to catch up here as time goes on. They usually, like the USDA, are kind of lag the market a lot of times. But so I think you'll see them slowly inch higher as time goes on. But you're hearing some, high expectations, very high expectations in Mato Grosso, where the state as a whole, might end up averaging like 10% more than what the kind of the early season estimates were. And they're what is going to influence things the most, right? Because they, produce close to half of what that safrinha corn crop is.
Now, the top line on the list, Ag Rural, isn't that a Brazilian consultancy firm?
Yeah. But there's other Brazilian consultants there too. They're on the other end of the spectrum. So even in Brazil, they can't all agree on what the forecasted number should be. So probably a lot like us here. Everyone comes with their crop estimate ideas, and they can vary a lot too. So
do you think Ag Rural tends to lowball everything every year or not?
No, I don't. I wouldn't say that. I want. They're located more in the south. I wonder if. Sometimes you get backyarditis, and that tends to influence the way you see things, and we're probably guilty of that as well, where we had major flooding in northwest Iowa, and so we were expecting there to be more yield lag than maybe what there was, although eventually it did show up. They cut the yield, but it took them till January to do it. And when it took them 6 months to do it, we started to think, well, maybe we were just seeing things, right? And it wasn't matter. Well, it did. It just sometimes takes 6 months or more to show up in the market.
And now we come to a graphic that caught me off guard a little bit. Matthew, explain this one here. This is a story that I haven't heard too much about.
Brazil recently announced that they did find bird flu in their one of their commercial poultry facilities located in Rio Grande do Sul. And, it was very quickly, I think it was like May 16th that they found this. And within 48 hours, they had, basically stopped or temporarily suspended trade, I think, which is a big deal because Brazil is the largest poultry exporter in the world. They export to 160 countries. Some of their biggest poultry partners are China, um, uh, Saudi Arabia, Japan, and so those are temporarily suspended, I think, for like a little less than 30 days, something like that. So in a few more weeks, if everything gets taken care of, those exports will continue. So they did end up culling and destroying a lot of those flocks that they did find. And I did read too that they've found bird flu before, but in wild birds, going back a couple years or more. And so they've kind of been prepared for this, and they've been working on this for years. They said putting these sanitation protocols in, and so they were very quick. It looks like, I mean, when they found it, they alerted, the proper authorities and had protocols in place, and but they don't expect the overall country production to decrease outside of those birds that were culled. But longer term, they think everything will go back to normal. But we'll have to see. It was just a surprise, obviously, that they found it in the commercial flock, and that kind of caught everybody off guard, I guess.
You think they'll have an egg shortage there, like what we did here?
We'll have to see. It's probably going to take more than this, but they had been supplying the United States with eggs. As I think the U.S. was bringing in eggs from other countries, and Brazil was one of the places they were doing it. So maybe they'll just quit helping out other countries with shortages and make sure that their supply is okay. But yeah, they produce eggs and chickens all over the country. I think in the state that they found it in Rio Grande do Sul was like just 10% of the overall production just in that state. And so, not that the whole state is impacted, but just give you an idea that it probably will just be a temporary blurb in the overall picture.
Well, other than that, we're looking at the end of the month here. Do you think funny things could happen in the markets before we turn that calendar over to June, or not?
I'm disappointed in the wheat today. We had a lot of news that could have impacted the wheat, and Trump talking about how Putin is crazy, and Putin continues to ratchet up those attacks on Ukraine. I was hoping he was going to fix this all on day one, but it hasn't happened. And so I don't know. It doesn't seem like there's going to be any happy ending there for some time, and that's just kind of a weight on corn, it seems like. But yeah, not a lot of news right now. We're just trading the weather, and so far, for the most part, the weather is pretty favorable.
Very interesting stuff here this week. I appreciate you bringing all this up. Some things I really wasn't even aware of, and a very interesting discussion. Look forward to talking with you again here real soon, but thanks for the update. I like that. Matthew Kruse, president of Comstock Investments, with us here on Tuesday, the first trading day of a short week. And that'll do it for this episode. Thanks again for tuning in. Appreciate that. For our producer, Brianne Jenkins, I'm Marlin Bohling. We'll catch you next time here on the Comstock channel. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and or options is substantial, and each investor and or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.